Because you'll have two different types of people that request apartment life for their communities. The person who wants to see the financial results, and you'll have the person who something feels different about this community.
Welcome to the Fresh Expressions Podcast Season 5. I'm Heather Jallad, a pastor and cultivator of new faith communities that aim to reach new people in surprising places. This season focuses on community, how to build it, and how new kinds of churches can help combat the loneliness epidemic in North America. Along the way, I'll be joined by friends from the movement to co-host and add their insights as practitioners of Fresh Expressions of Church. We hope this episode deepens your understanding of loving our neighbors and leading faith communities in today's changing landscape. If you enjoy our podcast, please help us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or sharing an episode with friends or on social media. Now, let's dive in. All right. Well, welcome back to the Fresh Expressions Podcast, where we are really digging into what our Surgeon General has called the loneliness epidemic and how the church can uniquely address that. For those of you who are familiar with the Fresh Expressions movement, you know that the Fresh Expressions journey really dives in on this idea of building community and all of the ways that we can go about doing that in the wider community. Outside the walls of our church. And so I'm here with some new friends from Apartment Life. Some of you may be familiar with this long time movement in our communities. And I can't wait to get to have this conversation with them about how they are partnering with our churches and in our communities to do just that, to build community, to be that incarnational witness and presence in apartment complexes in our community. So without further ado, Sean, Josh, would you please introduce yourselves and tell everybody a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, I'll start. I'm Sean Bailey, and I work for Apartment Life as the National Vice President of Customer Experience, which is a big word for we want to make sure everyone who works with us, partners with us, is happy, and that we have a process for our people that is loving and would reflect to the world the kingdom of God in every way possible. So I've been with Apartment Life for 13 years, and I live in Orlando, Florida. So
awesome.
And my name is Josh Jackaway. I serve as a vice president in our West Division, and our Apartment Life is a couple of different divisions. Our West Division is made up of what would be considered the Midwest, Mountain West, Southwest, Pacific Northwest, and California. So there's a kind of pretty large geography that I've got some responsibility over. And a big part of what we do is making sure that we're serving our clients really well, hearing how we can best design a program to serve the residents of their apartment community, as well as attracting and discerning who the best coordinators are going to be to serve inside of that apartment community. And so that's kind of a big part of what I do. I've been with Apartment Life for 4 years. Prior to serving here at Apartment Life, I was a pastor, church planter. I live here in Kansas City, Missouri. Moved here in 2007 with some friends to plant a church, and kind of made my way into Apartment Life 4 years ago through some mutual friends that I had that served here with Apartment Life, and couldn't stop talking about the amazing work that was being done across the country through this ministry. So excited to get the opportunity to be a part of this conversation today.
Yeah. So Josh, you have a background in church planting. So that's very interesting. And it's not lost on me that 4-year timeline. So we'll get back to that. What happened 4 years ago? I have no idea. Sean, how did this become a part of your life? How did you get involved with the Apartment Life movement?
Yeah, so I actually came to Christ late in life. I was 24 and moved back home to Orlando, and was looking to kind of rebuild my life. And somebody offered me a job at a church in their communications team. And I was like, absolutely. Jesus would definitely want me to go work for a church. So I didn't ask any questions. I didn't pray about it. I just literally showed up. And I'm thankful that decision, the Lord didn't let me make the wrong decision. But I got to work on staff at First Baptist Church Orlando, which obviously pretty large church. And it became really my home church as I started out. And then about 5 years later, felt the call from the Lord to go start planting churches. And right around that exact same time, You may have remember a 2020 special that was all over the news that was talking about homelessness in Central Florida and how folks were moving into our vacation corridor, as they call it, where all these hotels were having full families living in these hotels because they were struggling with this housing epidemic in our country. And so basically at that time, a well-known industry professional came in and said, hey, we're going to go try to help house these people in traditional like apartment communities. We want to kind of create a stair-step way to get them to that and give them foundation. But we really need the church to be a part of that. And so our church at First Orlando at the time was a part of that conversation. And how do we do that? And then at that same time, Apartment Life kind of just entered to the conversation. And when I heard the mission and vision of who Apartment Life was, I really decided at that point, if I was going to go plant a church and go be a part of that, I also wanted to be a part of what Apartment Life was doing because it was just strategic for our city in that season. But it became this thing of like, oh no, this is actually how you create foundations for people's lives in healthy ways. And the church can be fully a part of that. And I just wanted to be a part of whatever was happening there.
So it sounds like you are one of the apostle evangelists that Paul calls out in Ephesians 4 to me, that just really was your heartbeat as a planter, someone called to plant churches, but also someone that really embraced the idea of that incarnational mission.
Absolutely.
And those two worlds really coming together.
It was unbelievable.
That's a beautiful thing when God does that, Amen. Isn't that? So like, what did that look like, I guess, in the beginning for you specifically, Sean? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So I've been with Apartment Life for 13 years. So that was the early stages of Florida. There was no Apartment Life in Florida in that season. And so one of the major developers in the area who was a believer said, hey, we would love to put Apartment Life on every one of our communities. Tell us, how we would go about doing that. And so we took from kind of the wisdom that had been existing for, at that point, 15 years or so in the Dallas area, 10 years or so in the Dallas area. We're getting ready to celebrate 25 years this next year in 2025. Okay. So we started in 2000. So they had been doing this a long time in Texas, but as you know, Florida is different, absolutely different. And so what it really became for me, a person who came from the radio world previously to now working within the church world to now going, okay, I'm going to come back to an industry. What is this multifamily industry really about? And at the core of it, the multifamily industry is very much like a hospitality industry, very much a management, investor fund kind of, group of people. So we want to take care of our finances really well. And we also want to take care of our people really well. That's really the two tenets of multifamily. And so I began this process of learning how their business worked and then learning like, at the core of what they're looking for are people who would invest in other people right there on site. And that's actually the call, our founding, 25 years ago. Stan Dobbs is a former Intel or executive businessman, became a church pastor, saw the need of a local apartment community, went to the owners of those communities and said, hey, what do you guys need here? And they're like, well, we need resources. We need people who would invest in us. We need people who would serve these people that really move into apartments in many transitional problems, right? Or situations, right? They just got their first job. They just moved to a big city, or they had a family situation change. There were so many like transitional moments that were happening. And that volatility creates some financial problems essentially for them. And so, so essentially in Florida, we started to kind of meet those needs, find those needs among the developers and owners and management companies within the area. And then we would go to the local church and say, hey, here's a community that's looking for just individuals that would love their people well. And then Apartment Life really brought along that training and development to kind of undergird that community in a way that the business just can't do. And so we were the nonprofit that kind of sat among the business leaders and said, hey, I think we can speak directly to this need. And so I, for the past 13 years, just learned from some of the experience of what we've done across the whole country and brought that to Florida and seeing God move. I think we have now over 50 communities in the state of Florida now and growing strong. So.
Wow. Thank you. Wow. Josh, how has this kind of you had planted churches for I don't know how many years, and then this became a possibility 2020. Like, tell us that story. How did that all come about?
Yeah, it was actually a pretty natural evolution. So when we planted our church in 2007, I got connected with a guy named Chris Brannigan, who was from Texas and moved here to Kansas City, was going to grad school here and had served with Apartment Life there and had been really eager to figure out how would that expand to Kansas City. And at the time, there wasn't really a model that would have really allowed that to happen. And so I connected him with a friend of mine who was doing a similar kind of ministry as Apartment Life. And over the course of the next, 10 years, got to partner with his name's Bill and the organization he was leading, Community Life, by referring coordinators to serve with his ministry. And we got a firsthand glimpse of the intentional impact that you can make inside of an apartment community by mobilizing people from our church to live on site of that apartment community and then mobilizing volunteers to show up and help. And so through that, we saw and connected with community managers who would tell us that through our team of volunteers that we had seen, calls to police had went down in that neighborhood, crime had went down, there were less cars getting broken into, there were less neighbors getting in fights with each other, that residents were renewing their lease and staying longer. We were really involved in some of our local schools and would actually even hear stories through the work that was being done to serve those students inside even the halls of those schools. And so over the course of that period, I really became intrigued by the work that was happening with Apartment Life. And then as my wife and I continued to just be really invested inside of our neighborhood and figuring out ways beyond just kind of a Sunday morning experience, but figuring out how do you kind of really incorporate into your everyday ordinary lives and kind of seed pockets of beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus in your everyday ordinary lives and look for ways for the kingdom of God to emerge. And so as we were doing more and more of that inside of our neighborhood, had the opportunity to shift over vocationally and join the team at Apartment Life. They had an opening at that time, and it really felt like it aligned with more and more of the calling that I had and the areas of passion that were kind of emerging within me. So it was actually a pretty seamless transition. 2020, as you imagine, was like a year of transition for a lot of people. Yeah. And so I had went from being accustomed to speaking, 48 out of 52 Sundays to all of a sudden that being disrupted, in 2020, and allowing me to kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, if I could hit a reset button and kind of go in a different direction, what would I do? And Apartment Life emerged at that exact same time as I was kind of in that season. So it's been amazing over the last several years to get to really journey deeper with our organization to help see people move more intentionally into their apartment communities, figuring out ways that we can better even partner and serve churches and other faith-aligned nonprofits that have kind of a similar desire to want to have impact in apartment communities, but oftentimes don't have an avenue to do so. And realizing we can really be a bridge for churches that want to be engaged further in their community, but don't feel like they have an outlet to do that. Ministries that want to figure out how we can better serve and invest in the people who live right around us, and are looking for ways to kind of expand beyond just a come to us, listen to us kind of model and say, okay, well, how can we do that? And Apartment Life is really a great stair step towards that because we've got a lot of the infrastructure and support to move people in that direction. So whether that's a church or a nonprofit that really wants to see people mobilized from here to out there, we can kind of say, hey, we can help you stair step into that direction. And as you kind of get the taste of the first fruits of what God's going to do through your coordinators with Apartment Life, I believe that that's going to really then light a fire for other people to move in that direction. And I just think even of my own journey, when I was right out of college, I lived in an apartment community, and that was my first taste of really kind of grown up life. I was planted in a, apartment community that was almost all predominantly young adults. Mm-hmm. And my roommate and I just really felt like, what could we do to love and serve and get to know our neighbors around us? And through that, we got to know like 30 or 40 of the different residents that just kind of lived in our little pocket of this really big apartment community, started hosting them inside of our homes, looking for ways to invite them over to watch football games on Friday nights. Hey, we're all just going to go out, hang out together. And this really unique community emerged where over time we started a small group through our church that met inside of our apartment at that apartment community and saw that multiply. So by the time we moved out, we 3 different small groups from our church community that was happening inside of that apartment. And that experience in my early 20s really changed the whole trajectory of how I've neighbored ever since. So every place I've ever lived, whether that was in other apartments or in the home that we live in and previous homes we've lived in, has really just been about how do we take what was kind of like the norm in my early 20s and just continue that natural evolution of saying, how do we listen to people's stories, invite them into our lives, create safe spaces for people to feel known, cared for, valued, supported, no matter their background, faith experience, whether they've ever been to church before, whether they have any concept of, who Jesus might be, or a lot of misconceptions about what they think Jesus might be like. And as you invite people further into your life, you get natural on-ramps for deeper conversations. And through that, get to see more and more of God's kingdom emerge into those spaces.
Well, I just want to pull some things out of what both of you said, what both of you have shared, because I think they're so significant to what I want our listeners to hear, what I think is so important to how we think about engaging our community, connecting with our community, building relationships, and really addressing this loneliness epidemic. I mean, first of all, just the multiplicative impact that is possible when the church can partner with movements like Apartment Life, with movements like the Fresh Expressions movement, and what you saw happen, Sean, when you first got involved, and now to have 50 different apartment complexes, different communities involved in this, I think is really significant. But also this whole idea, I mean, I can't help but think, and I'm sure this is probably just on replay in your lives, but the Eugene Peterson's translation of John 1, right? Jesus became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood, right? Yeah. And like literally, this is Jesus becoming flesh and blood and moving into the neighborhood and the people of God, and just the impact that can have when we fully inhabit the places and spaces where we live and work and eat and play. And that's something that we really, really emphasize in Fresh Expressions, in forming relationships and building community. Because we don't do that anymore. That's just not something we do because we're flying from place to place. And unfortunately, oftentimes we get our coffee at the same place all the time, but we don't see that person necessarily as a human being in front of us that has a story, that, that has a background, that has a family, that whatever, that has their own hurts and hangups and whatever. But we really, really value this idea of fully inhabiting the places and spaces that we live, work, eat, and play. The other thing that I think that I heard in what you were sharing, Josh, that I have certainly witnessed and seen and heard stories of in Fresh Expressions is the ability to really just the fruit of fully inhabiting the places where we live, and how you've seen this change the atmosphere of an entire community where crime goes down, where people want to stay longer because they found something there in those relationships, in those friendships, in those schools, and everything else that makes them want to stay. Right. Yeah. Because apartment complexes are often very transient communities. And so people kind of come and go frequently. They don't necessarily often stay for long periods of time. Although I'd be curious to hear if that's changing just because of the housing situation in our country, if that's changing. But I mean, those are usually pretty fluid communities where people are coming and going fairly often. I also heard that every church is looking for young adults. So, that there was a large community of young adults where you were. And I think that's significant as well. And the last thing that I heard that I think is really significant is this idea of being in these transitional times of life, or, moving into a new place. Maybe it's a new job. Maybe it's having to move out of a house into an apartment. Maybe it's a change in a family situation where you have to move into an apartment. All of those things are significant times in a person's life. And I know we know as pastors, and I know a lot of people, know this just in general. Those are times in a person's life where they need community, they need family, they need to know they're not alone. Those are times where we often feel the most lonely. Mm-hmm. And so I just think there's just so much for us to hear in this conversation. So
and kind of on that point, I mean, one of the things, just to kind of help paint a picture for viewers, listeners, is we serve every different type of apartment community. Yeah. So when we talk about in one apartment community, let's say crime goes down and there's less calls to police, that's maybe a pocket of the service that we provide, but we serve every different apartment community. Yeah. So from affordable, low income, government subsidized, all the way through your traditional suburban apartment communities to luxury high rise apartment communities in the city. And what that means is that we get access to serve basically any type of person of any different type of background, including people who might be here from other countries. So take, for instance, last week I was in Indianapolis visiting with some of our coordinators there, and I got to hear from one of our coordinators, this one couple that was talking about in their apartment community. They live downtown Indianapolis. They live in a pretty high-end luxury apartment community. Mm-hmm. That they have a number of people from all over different countries in Asia that have people who are coming here to go to medical school. And so they're like, we've got kind of like the upper end of these different countries' societies that are coming here to learn from our doctors that are here temporarily, and then they're going back to their country. And one of our coordinators told a story about one family that moved in, and they realized, the husband is here to go to medical school, very fluent in English, but his family that came with him didn't speak any English, right? No. They were from a country in Asia. It hadn't been something that they'd been exposed to. And they used that and they said, hey, this is a great opportunity for us to leverage our kind of connections in our community to use that as a way to serve this family, right? And so recognizing this family is going to be here for a couple years. This is not, we're here for a few weeks and we're going back. They're going to be here for a couple of years, and English will be a really valuable tool for them to have access to, for them to feel comfortable right here. And so what they started doing is just serving this family, partnering with them in this way. And over time, that family started asking them questions and saying, hey, what's your motivation, or why do you do this? And through this, they got to share their faith, and they got to point people towards Jesus along the way. And they said, honestly, we have no understanding of who Jesus is. This is not a part of our kind of like culture or religious background. And so they said, well, hey, let's just read the Bible together. And they realized a lot of the different Bibles that we have inside of our apartment are all in English, right? They're like, we've only ever spoken English. Right. They said, well, let's find one that's in your heart language, like in your native language. And so they partnered with the church, they found one, and it was a kind of dual translation, English on one side, the family's native language on the other. And they spent over the course of the next year going through and doing some intentional Bible studies around who Jesus was, using that kind of dual language translation. Yeah. And so when that husband earlier this year graduated from medical school and the family moved back to their country in Asia, they got to send them with that Bible, as well as with access for how they might be able to embed what they had just experienced back in their culture. That would be in a place that would be really hard for us to mobilize anyone to take the good news of Jesus towards. And so there's little things like that you start to realize through the ministry of apartment life. It's not just what is happening inside of those apartment communities in that moment, but the opportunity for the ripple effects that lead out from that over time, that the people that you serve and invest in this season are going to go somewhere else. They're going to move into another apartment community. They're going to buy their first home. They're going to move to another part of the country. They're going to move to another country. And what we get to do gets to be like the little bits of seeds that are planted that we don't know all of the fruit that it's going to bear as it kind of like goes in these other different directions. So that's just kind of a one story of kind of a different way that we've seen our coordinators serve in a different type of community that's not just about, crime or
Josh, I love that because I mean, you're not coming in hot like like let me tell you about Jesus.
Right.
You were meeting people where they were,
Exactly.
and discovering how, number one, the common ground that you shared, and then number two, like how can we serve this family and this community, and that became an opportunity where they were asking questions, right?
Yes.
And so I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Sean, I'm wondering if there's a story that you have to share, maybe in a community that you're familiar with or somebody that you've encountered along the way, in your apartment life journey.
Well, I'll go back to kind of where you were touching on just about the demographics and the populations in there. At a high level, like just during COVID, there was I think the Ministry of Housing in London said that like 200,000 people above the age of 60 had not seen another person for over 90 days during COVID, right? So now let's take that reality and put it into our convenience economy that we now live within, right? Where you can pretty much have anything come to your doorstep and never need to leave again. And imagine the level of isolation that's enabled now within our world, right? So just yesterday was hanging out with a coordinator couple that was speaking at an event for us. And they just shared about, it doesn't come off as anything major, but like just a single mom who moved into a neighborhood who was very much pregnant, but alone. And it was a very odd sign of some major thing has happened in this individual's life, and they wanted to get to know her. And so they happened to be holding an ice cream event, and she showed up, and they began to ask some different questions and find out that she did go through a major life transition, and a very hurtful moment in her life. And they didn't immediately go after that moment, right? They just let her know that she was known at that point, right? Someone in that community now knew her story, and she wasn't hiding from that story anymore. And so God could use that moment to bring about more. And so they began to share kind of over time, her being known, what was needed. And then like Josh shared before, and from her feeling like she is now fully known, she wanted to know what it was that they were about and who they were and what was going on with them. And from that, obviously, connection into the local church. She came from a faith background and knew that she needed that for her children and wanted to be a part of that and was able to get plugged into those things. But I think that's the story we often hear. Like you said, all these moments of transition, it's just, am I known by somebody? And then are those people for me? And so that's what kind of the first thing we do at Apartment Life. And you work with a bunch of different churches across the country and different things. Our number one conversation with the church is like, number one, don't be weird. Right? Like,
amen.
We're just people. We're just people who want to love on people. And the reality is they may receive us, they may not receive us. That doesn't change what we put out into the life of the community, right? And Apartment Life is unique. And obviously you can hear from even the way that we talk about it, we don't talk ministry language oftentimes. Right. We talk about the business because we do think that there is a balance between business and ministry. And we kind of call that our businessry, where we really want to see intention at all times. That the end of the day, the product that we're providing, which is people who love people, is really being seen through, like that the data actually shows that life change is happening. Because you'll have two different types of people, right? Like that request Apartment Life for their communities. You'll have the person who wants to see the financial results, and you'll have the person who kind of, like Josh spoke to earlier, and I think you keyed on, was something feels different about this community. Like I walk into my community now and I can just feel like something's going on. People don't come in and yell at my manager anymore. They come in now and they love her and like they're bringing her brownies and stuff. Like
she's an actual person.
Right,
yes.
Right. Yeah. That's another big training. Like they're human beings, everybody. We had to come back from COVID and literally train people like, hey, people have forgotten that your manager is a human. How can you help with that? And how can you connect them? Because when COVID happened, the on-site teams, they left the communities, but our coordinators didn't, right? Oftentimes in our on-site model, they're the only connection to management and ownership that is still left in the community. And so, that kind of goes also to like just the change that we've seen, right? Like we are now realizing that it's not always possible for us to move somebody into this apartment community. It could be because that property's selling soon, and it would not be smart to move someone into that situation when a sale is going to happen. So We have an offsite model now where somebody who is connected to the local church and those resources and nonprofits can actually serve that community and come in for strategic events and be a part of that, right? And do things. Now they're still building those relationships. They're still connecting with people, but they're not really they're not really living on site like others would do. We thought people would not probably connect with us as much if we were to do it this way. It's not true. The reality is there's a scarcity to the fact that this person is here now. They might not be here tomorrow. I want to have a conversation with them because the times that I have met them, I feel more like I could share more of what's going on truly with what's happening with me. And then that reality of we're not the managers. So the cool part is they're sharing their whole story, the fullness of what's going on in their life. And they would never share that to the person that is expecting a rent check from them every single month. And so we began to hear these stories of like, I just lost my job and I don't know what I'm going to do about it. And before their rent check is due, the coordinator has connected them to local resources in the community or to the local church or different ways that they could find a way. And then they come to pay their check and they go, you don't know this, but your apartment life coordinators were there for me. And they were able to provide in a way that I just found a new job through different connections and things. And now I'm going to be okay. And you're not going to lose your rent because they were able to help me in that. And it really just changes. We're there for them in those hard times. And it takes even though it's a business model of what we do, that's only there to create the sustainability so that the mission can go forth, so that we are able to serve and reach our mission of any community anywhere in the world. That's our desire, is to make as many different types of products to cover all the various types of cultures and people that are out there in the world.
Yeah, I just love the the kingdom mindedness of what you're doing, that it's not you're not operating in a silo, that you look to really form those partnerships across the community. It's not just necessarily the church that you're working with, but also those nonprofits across the community, and how all of those can work together for the glory of God, for the mission of God, and for that particular community or whatever the case may be. I think that is incredibly valuable. And Sean, you said something that I hadn't even thought about. When I think about just how our culture has changed, I often think about just how community development has changed. And, of course, this started in the 1900s when we started building houses with garages and electric, garage door openers where you could drive into your garage and not see your neighbor and then go out on your back porch when, once upon a time you were on your front porch and you said hi to your neighbors and you walked everywhere and all those things. And I hadn't thought about the convenience economy, as you call it. And, just having everything delivered to your house, and how you can just leave it at my door and you can never even see the delivery person if you want to. And that's just taking it a step further. You talked a little bit about how COVID has had you adapt a little bit to how your coordinators are serving. But I'm wondering if how at least I've seen this where I am, and I think this is kind of happening in different places across the country. And that is these little communities that are popping up that are kind of like your live, work, eat, play. It's like almost creating your new little town center. And these because people don't want to necessarily go into town. They kind of want everything self-contained. And you kind of have a resurgence of the new urban center. So you have two different things happening. How has that impacted the work of apartment life, or has it?
Well, one thing I'll jump in there and add about this is one of the cool things that we train our coordinators on is not just how do they serve the residents, but how do they partner with businesses and other organizations that already exist in that area to partner with them in serving the residents. So when they host an event, for instance, saying, hey, don't just like host an event and buy everything from Costco and just kind of make it its own siloed thing. But what are the other great coffee shops, catering groups, exercise studios that are really in close proximity? And this can be a win-win for them, because what it does is it allows them to go out to a really great community partner to highlight for those residents that they might not have otherwise the exposure to. And it allows that business to have access to perhaps a whole new clientele. And the cool thing about that is that in a lot of communities, to your point, there's a lot of amazing things that are within minutes of where you might live, and you might just not know that they exist. So that's part of what we're training our coordinators on. And so those more like vertically integrated communities that you're talking about is a great way for our coordinators to say, hey, we're going to partner with that coffee shop this month. We're going to partner with that taco restaurant, later this month. We're going to partner with that yoga studio down the street. Oh, that new kind of pop-up bar. We're going to partner with them. And so there's really a lot of those things that they can start to bring in that makes those really attractive events for the residents to show up to. They're like, oh yeah, like this is really cool. I've seen that taco place, right down the street. I've not even checked it out, but they're doing an event with my apartment community.
Yes. I'm
excited to check that out. So we try to find those kind of sticky connections that form natural partnerships along the way and allow us to kind of maximize the dollars and cents that we have available to host and engage those types of events. So that's just kind of one example that I would share of even how those things fit together. Yeah. But I think that part of what makes people want to move into those apartment communities is, as Sean was talking about, like the convenience factor. So we are seeing more and more apartments that have kind of all of these different amenities. So it's like, hey, you've got all of that right here. But we're also seeing cities move from a zoning standpoint where that's even a part of their model. Like I was in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that's happening in Minneapolis is that there's a huge need for housing, but the problem is that you have limited land available in the city, like every city does, right, to be able to build housing. And so you might have a lot of more like 1 and 2 level businesses that exist. So what Minneapolis has moved towards is this model of like, well, when you build a multifamily, maybe it's going to be 6, 12, 14 floors tall, you're going to reserve the bottom level for what they call legacy businesses. And so that nail studio that is being displaced to build that apartment community now immediately has a space for them to move back in. So you're not displacing the local businesses, whether that's the nail studio, the hair salon, the barber shop, the bodega that's right there on the corner. And so the cool part about that is that you're now seeing how do you allow vertical housing to get built in cities while still maintaining those, legacy businesses that have been there perhaps for multiple families that have passed those on, right? And so anyways, that's just another example where you're starting to see that trend kind of happen across the country.
Yeah, I think you've named something really important, Josh, that I think I try to, I think as somebody who does some the training for Fresh Expressions, that I try to a lot of people ask, like, how am I going to pay for this or that or whatever for my Fresh Expression? And it's through relationships, right?
Yeah.
If you form those relationships with people in your community, a lot of times people will just give you stuff.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, in general, people want to give back to the community.
Right.
Businesses want to give back to the community. They want good things for the community, and they want to be known in the community, right? And so, I think that those relationships are really important. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sean, what would you add to this conversation?
I think, 10 years ago, we were all talking in the church world about asset-based community development, right? This ABCD model, right? And then we kind of got away from it because COVID seemed to kill all of the assets. Not really, but that's what we acted as if. But that's the reality of it. Like the world is now caught up to that reality too, right? Like what Josh was talking about, you imagine when everyone was building their suburbs, they cut out all the beautiful trees. And then what happens? They plant new trees.
That's right.
Like, 50 years from now, that'll be great, y'all. That's going to be awesome. But you cut out all the beauty that was already in there. And I think that's what multifamily people kind of, because they are vertically integrated, like Josh was talking about, multifamily developers come in with this mindset of we can do something about the way that our community, and they don't just mean their individual community, but the community around it is affected by what we're displacing or what we're doing. And they're really trying hard to make that work well, even on the inside of the community. So if they're in a district that's very much an art district, they have galleries inside of their buildings and other things. Right. And those galleries oftentimes will do all kinds of free stuff for them, right? And connect the to their artists and fun stuff. So we have that kind of happening. And then going back to the population thing, right? We have, it was the large swing, like I think it's the number one population in multifamily is the people moving to a city to get their first big girl, big boy job, right? Like that's the biggest demographic. But this demographic that's coming up behind them is the senior adult. I don't want a house anymore. I don't want to worry about anything that I have to go on. I just want to get rid of it. I want somebody else to take care of all of this for me because we have enough income that we can afford to do these things. And they're looking for the senior adult, active lifestyle communities, whatever version. There's a bunch of different types. And even now the assisted living facilities look a whole lot like those, and they're kind of resort style, and they have like 3 or 4 different stores built into them. Like they're amazing communities. Well, that population is the loneliest ever, right? Because when do you move into that situation? It's not oftentimes as a couple that you would go and do that. It's when someone passes away, right? So the husband or the wife dies. And now I've moved to this community, and we had one just in North Tampa, the retreat, and beautiful community. And the manager, I said, what could we do to serve you? Like, what is it that you need from an apartment life coordinator? And he said, I would literally pay you just to talk to the people who are lonely in my community. And I said, well, what is that? Like, what does that look like on a daily basis for you? And he says, I have 3 or 4 folks that come by my office every day because they need someone to talk to. That's it. And he goes, I have a job and I really need to get my job done. And I love these people. This was an amazing manager. His heart was awesome. He said, I just don't have time to do it. And so that's what we did. We hired a team. They threw a couple of events, and they became those people that noticed other people, that served other people. We had an elderly woman in that community that was, she was afraid that she didn't have enough to eat, or she was worried about that. So she'd come to the events and she'd bring her own tinfoil and she would put food into the thing. And once the coordinators saw that, they would just, hey, we're going to go ahead and set aside some food for you. Every event that we did. And she didn't really have a problem like that, but it was a security for her. And they began to serve that for her. And so as we see this population growth and what's there, like we've done a lot of great work. We're in 650 communities nationwide, but that's not even touching the surface, maybe 2% of what's possible across the entire globe. And really our biggest struggle is that we need people. We need people who feel called to serve and love their neighbors in tangible ways, and to be brave enough to jump into that type of a relationship with people that they've never met for the first time. Is it worth it? It's 100% worth it. What you get out of it, like once apartment life coordinator, you'll never not be an apartment life coordinator. We have alumni who still today tell us stories. They've moved to their suburban community or whatever it is, but now they're living it out at Halloween and other events. And,
of course,
and they're sharing those stories of what is happening. So it's definitely worth it, but it's that first step of like, how do I be brave enough to go do this? And how much is this going to interrupt my life? And it's going to interrupt a lot.
Yes, it is.
But it's going to be in every great way that God calls you to, because that's how we're changing as individuals, as believers, right? It's in that vulnerability of putting ourselves in that place where God can say, I know what you want for you, but I have something fully better in the gospel and the freedom of living out the gospel in your daily life. And so it's in that call that we go, all right, I'm gonna just choose to do this. And what's cool is at apartment life, you can choose to do this for a season. You could test it out. You can walk forward in that. And I'd say that's true for any ministry, but we make it seem a little easier, I guess, here, because it's housing in a lot of areas, right? It's like transitions, or it's a part-time job. It's something you can do on top of your job. And you may work at a church. You can also do this, which is, it does feel weird that we're like, hey, we're a talent agency for people who want part-time jobs to love other people. Like, I think that's also called the Great Commission. I might be wrong about that, but
I love that.
We will pay you to do it too, because it does. That's the thing. I guess we're vulnerable about it because we don't realize how much value it actually does create beyond the kingdom impact. There is also things that reverberate in our world every single day that changes people's like total countenance and understanding of how they should be living. And that's the hope in whatever election season and whatever major situation that's going on in the world.
That's right.
That's what will change it all. And so that's what we love to do.
Thanks, Sean. Now, if our listeners are listening on the podcast and they're not watching on YouTube, you should watch on YouTube because Josh has like a whole ethereal, like
It's
glory
like
of
I'm in a
God
Michael Bay
thing
movie.
going on right now.
I've got these like light flares going off
The
around.
Holy Spirit just showed up. And
That's
window.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's like,
I love it.
incredible.
So there's two things I want us to hit before we close out the conversation. And those two things are first, just a word of encouragement to our listeners as to what this could look like in their daily life. And then the other thing is how can churches maybe get connected to you and your work? But before we go there, is there anything else that either of you would like to share with our listeners, something that maybe you wanted to say that you didn't get to say? No,
I think it's great. I think Fresh Expressions, just what you guys do and the way that you start the conversation. I love, the dinner party projects and things like that just create little tangible ways that wake up the local church. And I just encourage if you're just now getting to know more about Fresh Expressions, like just lean into that relationship, because I love the way you challenge lovingly the as we call it, the traditional church in just living out its mission. And anybody, if your church in any way is trying to figure out how to do that, find anybody that challenges you to just think differently about the ways that you've done it all these years. And we're just, from myself, I'm still a part of a traditional church. I went from church planting to now being a part of a local Nazarene church, which I love and adore, but it's because of their posture towards their neighbors that has made them a fruitful church. And that is how the church will continue to grow and be fruitful. So don't be afraid to challenge your team or your pastoral staff just to look at things differently and maybe turn your city upside down to find out what's really inside of there that is your piece and your calling for the gospel of your community.
Thanks, Sean. We didn't even pay him to say that.
Not
either.
At all.
What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I would say kind of for anyone who's interested in doing this kind of work, you don't need Apartment Life to do that. We would love to be a resource. We'd love to partner and support you. But really, a lot of what we're doing, anyone could do inside their current apartment that they live, inside the current, suburb, subdivision, neighborhood that they're planted in. Anybody can do this. It starts with that posture of saying, I want to love and serve and listen to people around me and come in without this kind of agenda or making people feel like that they're a project or, there's some sort of end thing is coming in and just being present. Now, if people want to work with Apartment Life, we'd love to work with them. I love our CEO, Pete Kelly, has this joke. He says, we would love not just for people to give us their money. We want them to give us their entire life. And that idea of life is an acronym that stands for labor, influence, finances, and experience. And the reality is that anyone can partner with Apartment Life in one of those different levels. That we're looking for people who can partner with us on a labor standpoint that can serve as coordinators, whether that's on-site or off-site. As Sean mentioned, we serve in 650 apartment communities, but we've got a waiting list of almost 200 communities that we're looking to serve. And so we're looking for people who are interested in living on-site or off-site to do this intentional incarnational work. And so for some, maybe it's on the labor side. For others, it's influence. There might be people who have connections to people inside the multifamily industry. Maybe those are on the manager side, on the owner side. Maybe they're brokers and help deals transact. And so if you have relationships that are connected on that way, we would love to be able to network and hear their story, hear their needs, and see if there's ways that we might be able to collaborate together to serve those communities that they have responsibility over. On the financial side, it's amazing that we are a ministry that is largely funded through the business value that we offer. Roughly about 95% of what we need to continue to move forward as an organization is covered through this business model and the value that we provide our clients. But there is a 5% gap that we're responsible for at the end of the year. And so there are some people who are really generous to help us cover that 5% gap. And it's the best investment that someone can make financially, to know that really your money is getting multiplied 95 times over because of the way that our model is set up. And then experience, that we're looking for people who have experience, whether that's in multifamily, they've got a background in legal matters that relates to what we do, background in different technical aspects of what we do, that experience is going to be really helpful for us to continue to learn and grow, adapt, evolve, to be able to serve any apartment community anywhere in the world. So yeah, if anyone is interested in this, they can reach out to Sean or myself. It's just our names, Josh Jackaway at apartmentlife.org, Sean Bailey at apartmentlife.org. They can go to our website, and we would love to connect with them further and help them understand, whatever their story, whatever their background, there's probably a part that they can play at Apartment Life.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes for our listeners, and so that they can get in contact with you and learn more about Apartment Life as well. We have been closing out our episodes with one of our guests praying for our listeners. So I would love for one of you, you can like rock, paper, scissors it. I don't know, like praying for our listeners. Would one of you be willing to do that, please?
I will happy to do that, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Lord, thank you so much for this conversation. I just pray that you multiply it, Lord. I pray that this conversation would be had among every church staff and every board and just believer in the local church, Lord, that there are people outside of the doors, outside of the walls of our churches and our missional communities, even, Lord, that just need you. They desire to be known. They desire to live in healthy relationship with others. And Lord, they may be coming from some situation. They may have past hurt, past pain, just like every person inside of our church and a part of our communities, Lord. And they just want to be known and be a part of something that moves them. And Lord, we know more than anything, you have called us to live out of our brokenness, that we might just take those emotions and those pains and those passions and all that is you've built us creatively, Lord. You've given us just the ability to live wholly in you. Mm-hmm. And we desire that for others. Lord, we desire that not brokenness just be pushed aside, but that brokenness be healed. And from that healing, Lord, others who are broken would find out about ways to heal, Lord, and that we would just continue that cycle. Why would we go to a hospital to walk out fresh and anew, not to fully live again? And so, Lord, you have been our healer, our provider, and you've done that for each of us, even just on this conversation, Lord, and help us to boldly do that for others. Help us to not forget them, to remember them, to, as we drive around our communities, Lord, as we see these high rises, mid rises, just apartments everywhere around us, Lord, would you just help us to be in tune to the lives that are in there, not just individuals, but a whole swath of people, a small city of people that you have put within proximity of our churches and us as believers, Lord, that we are called to love and to serve. And help us to do that well, and connect us through only the ways that you can, through your kingdom. Make it radical, make it awesome, so that we can just give you all the glory in everything you do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you both so much. What a great conversation. I can't wait to share it with our listeners, and I look forward to the fruit that will come of it.
Amen.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in the places we live, eat, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. To learn a simple 5-phase process for starting a new expression of church, go to freshexpressions.com/how to start. Want to learn more from the Fresh Expressions team? Head over to freshexpressions.com/training to learn ways we can work together to provide coaching, training, and inspiration for your church or organization. You can also get more resources like this on FX Connect, an online community full of other church leaders passionate about reaching new people in new places. Access our entire library of practical and inspiring training materials and connect with other church leaders at fxconnectus.org. Season 5 of the Fresh Expressions podcast is hosted by me, Heather Jallad. It's edited by Joel Limbaum and produced by Jeanette Statz, Kathleen Blackie, and Chris Morton. Our U.S. Director of Ministries is Shannon Kaiser, and our Senior Director is Dr. Christopher Backert. If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify, and share this episode on social media. Now may God bless you in your work for the kingdom.